Uh, Greetings, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce Quarterly Economic Survey output event. As we gather today to discuss the latest survey results, we'll find ourselves at a crucial juncture for British business and the broader economy. The recent budget has not only reshaped the political landscape, but also set the stage for significant economic and policy developments that will influence business confidence and investment decision in the coming months and years. The Quarterly Economic Survey conducted by the British Chamber of Commerce is a vital barometer of the UK's economic health. It captures the sentiments and experiences of business across sectors, providing an invaluable snapshot of the current economic climate and future expectations. Our survey results will offer insights into how business in the Thames Valley and beyond reacted to the budget, shedding light on key issues such as investment intentions, workforce dynamics, and overall business confidence. The QES will also highlight the current state of business confidence and investment levels are critical indicators of future economic performance, reflecting business willingness to invest in new projects, hire staff, and expand operations. The survey findings on investment intentions and workforce trends will provide a clearer picture on how business are positioning themselves for the future amidst the evolving political and economic landscape. Today's event is not just about reviewing the numbers and statistics, it's about understanding the broader implications of these results for our business community. The insight we gain from the QES will help us identify the challenges we need to address and the opportunities we can seize. As we move forward, the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce remains committed to supporting our members, advocating for pro-business policies and fostering a thriving economic environment. I'm very excited to welcome our sponsors, James Cooper Kreston, and thank them for their support, which is invaluable. James Cooper Kreston are professional service providers offering tax, accountancy services to support you and your business. Sue Staunton is the joint managing partner. She manages a portfolio of clients covering a broad spectrum of industry and is well known in the business community. We welcome back Stuart Morrison from the British Chamber of Commerce to help us understand the national sentiment. Let me now hand to Stuart for the national view. Stuart.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tim. I'll just share some slides and talk you through the findings we're seeing at the UK-wide level. Great. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yep, indeed.
Fantastic. Thanks for that introduction, Tim. As you say, I'm Stuart Morrison from the British Chambers of Commerce. If you're not aware of the British Chambers of Commerce, we're the collective voice of all the accredited chambers around the UK, giving your local chamber a national platform to raise concerns and on behalf of businesses where you're based. And one of the main ways we do that is through our quarterly economic survey, as Tim has already outlined. Now, this quarter is one of the most important ones that we've done, coming as it did pretty much immediately after the budget at the tail end of last year. So in November and December last year, we heard from almost 5,000 businesses around the UK, and that really emphasizes the importance of this survey, why it is so highly regarded, and why, when we released the results early last week, we saw such an immense amount of coverage and a huge amount of interest in the survey. Because of the number of businesses we speak to, there's no other equivalent survey that reaches or hears from as many businesses as the QES does. And that's why the collective voice of the Chambers of Commerce is so powerful. Now, what did we hear from businesses this quarter? Well, the results really mark a clear shift in business conditions following on from the announcements in the budget. And we have a good comparison because we asked the same questions in Q3 prior to the budget and then followed them up in Q4. And what we've seen is growing concern about taxation. We're seeing most businesses, or a high proportion of businesses, expecting to raise their prices. And generally speaking, we're seeing business conditions in a weak position, and business confidence also slipping as a result of some of these things that we're talking about. So I'll go through quite briefly now each of those points in turn and have a look at the numbers we're seeing in the survey. So the first thing we'll look at is sales, so both domestic and export sales. The chart on the left looks at those domestic sales, asking businesses over the past 3 months whether or not their sales have increased, decreased, or remained the same. And here you can see it presented as a net balance in this line chart. Now, quite clearly, you can see towards the end of that chart, the results of this quarter, both of those lines, the red for firms in the services sector and black for those in manufacturing, both seeing quite a steep decline. So the proportion of firms reporting improvements in sales going downwards and reducing significantly from what we saw in Q3 earlier last year. The export sales is slightly less clear, and it does tend to be an indicator that's a little bit more volatile. But what is apparent is that the manufacturing sector, so the black line, has now dropped below that kind of 0% mark, so indicating that now more manufacturing firms are reporting declining export sales compared to improving export sales. And for services firm, it's held pretty flat at pretty much that 0% mark. So certainly neither manufacturing or services in a good position, but the trend slightly less clear for exports compared to that very distinctive downward turn in domestic sales. Now, to look directly really at what was announced in the budget, you can see the impact that's had on businesses' level of concern about various different things. So we asked this question: which of the following factors are more of a concern to your business than they were 3 months ago? And I've put a circle around taxation because the jump has been quite pronounced, really. So 48% in Q3 prior to the budget. So that was when there was a lot of speculation about what might be included. So concern about taxation was growing. Following those announcements, it's shot all the way up to 63% for businesses overall. Now, for different sectors, it is different. And actually, if you look at manufacturers, that proportion who are citing taxation as more of a concern actually shoots up to 70%. So an enormous proportion of firms citing taxation as much more of a concern than it was 3 months ago. And the obvious connection there is to the announcements made in the budget, and particularly around national insurance contributions for employers. What this means for firms' behavior, particularly around prices, is also quite clear to see in the data we've collected. Now, particularly if you look at the chart on the left, which I think is one of the most important charts we'll have in this presentation, it looks at the proportion of firms expecting their prices to increase, or decrease, or remain the same over the next 3 months, and presented here again as a net balance, as we saw in those early charts. Now, it's quite clear when you look at the direction of travel for those lines, both of them, for red for services, black for manufacturers, heading up pretty sharply. So the proportion of firms expecting to increase their prices over the next 3 months is much higher than it was in Q3. In fact, it's 55% of firms across the board suggesting that they'll have to raise their prices over the next 3 months, which is in stark contrast to the previous few quarters, where we're actually seeing the proportion of firms expecting to increase their prices steadily declining, especially from the peaks we saw in 2022-23. Now, the source of that cost pressure is also quite clear. On the right-hand side, you can see the red bar that indicates labor costs is up across the board and across pretty much every sector as well. There is some variation sector on sector, but overall, 75% of the firms that participate in the survey are saying that they're suffering pressure to raise prices from labor costs. So the clear correlation there between concern about taxation, increasing cost pressure from labor costs, leading to the likelihood of increased prices over the next 3 months. So that's the concern about prices that we're seeing. We're also seeing concerns about growth and some of the drivers of growth, for example, investment. And when we ask firms whether or not over the previous 3 months, their investment plans for plant and machinery has increased, decreased, or remained the same, you can see that there's been a bit of a jump up in the proportion of firms that are reporting a decrease in their investment plans, up to 24% this quarter from 18% the previous quarter. And the reverse is true for those reporting an increase, only 20% this quarter compared to 23% the quarter before and 25% the quarter before that. So smaller changes than what we've seen in sales and prices, but definitely something we want to keep an eye on as we know investment is such an important part of the growth picture. And actually sector by sector, there's a lot of variation. For example, in hospitality firms, 42% have reported a decrease in their investment plans over the past 3 months. So definitely something we want to keep a very close eye on. And I know it's also a priority for the government to improve investment as well. So another thing to look at is around recruitment and workforce issues. So we ask businesses over the next few months whether or not they expect their workforce to increase, decrease, or remain constant. And we have seen some changes here as well. Whereas in the previous quarters in 2024, we saw 7% in Q1, 6%, 8% saying that they expect a decrease in their workforce over the next few months. That jumped up a little bit, so up to 14% in Q4 right at the end of the year. So not an enormous change, but again, something we want to keep an eye on in terms of the direction of travel, especially when you consider that the proportion who expect an increase in their workforce has also dropped back. So from 29% last quarter to 26% this quarter. Similarly, the proportion that have tried to recruit are continuing to see difficulties, and that's continued to tick up in the chart on the right-hand side, where you can see the proportion of firms who tried to recruit, 79% of them have experienced difficulty in doing so, which again is a slight tick up from the previous quarter. So certainly not a particularly rosy picture of the workforce at the moment, although the changes again are not quite as pronounced as they were in terms of prices and sales as we saw earlier. So what does this all mean for business confidence coming into the start of this year? What we've seen is a decline in the proportion of firms expecting their turnover to improve. So when we ask businesses over the next 12 months what they expect to happen with their turnover, only about 49% of businesses say that they expect it to improve. Now, for context, if you look back to 2022, which was around the time of growing inflation of the mini budget period as well, when business confidence did take a big hit, you can see at that point around 44% of firms were expecting an improvement in turnover. So we're not quite at those levels at the moment, but certainly it's been a big drop off to the high 50s we saw earlier in last year, 58% in Q2, 56% in Q3, down now to 49%. So there's certainly a pretty clear indication that the announcements made in the budget have had a pretty big hit on the confidence businesses have about the year ahead. We've got a little bit, another couple of slides here just to look at the open text responses we received to the survey as well. The data obviously is very interesting and does paint a very clear picture of what's happening, but it's also great to have a look at the issues businesses are facing in their own words. And what they're saying is, as a result of some of the announcements, particularly around national insurance and minimum wage, they may be looking to put hiring and recruitment on hold. They'll be looking to cut costs, and they might also be looking to delay investment plans and focus more on the short term, which I think has quite clearly played out in the data we've already looked at. You can see examples here, really detailed responses we get from businesses, which really help us to illustrate exactly what is happening on the ground for businesses right around the country, from Northwest England, firms in Scotland, east of England. You can see great examples here of the types of issues businesses are facing. And this really helps us to emphasize the point when we're speaking to the media, when we're speaking to the government and trying to relay the issues businesses are facing. These wonderful case studies really help us to do that in a powerful way. So that's all in terms of the national data. Hopefully that was interesting, and I'll pass back to Tim to look at things at the local level.
Thank you, Stuart from the British Chamber of Commerce, and quite a radical change in some of those percentages seen from the last quarter when businesses last reported. But let me now hand straight to Sue Staunton, who's going to comment on the Thames Valley position. Thank you, Sue. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks very much, Stuart. I think it's very interesting. Thames Valley has always been a very wealthy area and very prosperous in terms of business activity. And so the commentary that Stuart portrayed in terms of the national picture, whilst reflected within the Thames Valley, it's nonetheless at a slightly different level. So there is probably a degree more confidence in the Thames Valley businesses than there is on from a national perspective. And that's reflected in the sorts of businesses that there are located within the Thames Valley. Having said that, very similar to the national picture, there is a lot of concern about tax in terms of, that has spiked right up to very similar levels to from a national perspective. And that's interesting because that can only be for businesses in relation to the increases in national insurance. But businesses are clearly concerned about what else might be in there coming forward, although there was no indication of that within the budget. I think it's also worthwhile remembering that this snapshot survey was taken very much following on from very closely to the announcement of the budget. And at the moment, we haven't seen the reality of what's going to happen because most of that won't happen until, most of the measures announced won't happen until April. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see what actually plays out across the Thames Valley and of course nationally following on from that. I think the other thing to note is there's concern about national insurance, obviously, and the impact that's going to have on businesses. And the commentary that we're getting from Thames Valley businesses is very much that they're looking to manage that twofold. One is by reducing planned pay increases across the board, but also very much by increasing prices to the end user. Now, if this is replicated, of course, then prices to the end user are likely to be perhaps even more than the relative proportion that's increased in the national insurance, because most of the companies will, of course, be facing if that's going to happen, will be facing increased costs from their suppliers as well, and we'll be looking to pass that on. So I think it's quite a complex picture that we're going to see coming through later on in 2025 as those measures around minimum wage and particularly around national insurance start to bite. What's interesting is that, up until that point, so looking backwards, businesses was looking pretty good in the Thames Valley, quite high confidence levels, but there's less confidence going forward because we're going into an unknown. And this of course, it's all about timing in terms of when these surveys are conducted. Very interesting to hear about what's happening and what the picture looks like for recruiters, of course, and they're pretty pessimistic about what's going to happen. We still see in the Thames Valley confidence about continuing to recruit, while some 56% are saying that they expect their workforce to remain constant. Nonetheless, there are some 30% are expecting still to increase their workforce going forward, which is good from an employment perspective, although of course we still have relatively high employment in the area, and that's reflected in the difficulties that are being experienced by people trying to recruit, and particularly I think in this area around professional and managerial classes of employees, and also in the skilled labour market. Seems to be much easier at the moment in the Thames Valley to recruit clerical and unskilled or semi-skilled workers. So I think that the message from all of this is that Thames Valley is reflective of what's happening nationally, but is in a better place probably in terms of the sorts of industries that are based here and the confidence levels that there currently are. But we need to look forward to seeing what happens in successive surveys once the impact of the budget starts to take hold.
Thank you, Sue, and James Cooper Kreston for your contribution there. So to close, further evidence of slowing confidence with fewer companies expanding their workforces in anticipation of the higher costs announced in the budget reported. With policy direction shifting, influencing taxation and regulation and infrastructure for business, understanding these impacts is crucial for strategic planning and risk management. Domestic policies aimed at fostering economic growth and innovation will further be in the spotlight. So in summary, Business confidence reduced nationally, or slightly less so in the Thames Valley area. More firms expecting to increase prices, and highest concern for external factors affecting business, and inward investment reduced or on hold. My thanks again to James Cooper Kreston and Sue Staunton and Stuart Morrison from the British Chamber of Commerce. And most of all, my thanks to you for watching and listening, and to our members across the Thames Valley. The next survey, 10th of February, make sure you have your say. Thank you so much. Goodbye.